Hey, welcome to our poetry unit. I'm so excited to be doing poetry with you guys. We got our beatnik poet cat up there saying, hey, poetry's cool. I want you to have this in your mind as you're watching the video. How can I understand poetry? Especially if you struggled with it in the past. Got some great quotes from some poets here. First, T.S. Eliot said once, genuine poetry can communicate before it's understood. Rita Dove said, poetry is language at its most distilled and most powerful. And Edgar Allan Poe said, poetry is the rhythmical creation of beauty. Oh, nothing much, but creation of beauty. Pretty cool stuff here. Let's get to it. We got some notes to take, right? The key difference between poetry and prose. First of all, know that poetry and verse are the same thing. These words are synonymous. And prose is anything that isn't poetry and verse. Prose is what you've spent most of your time analyzing. It's short stories and novels and memoirs and news articles and speeches and all of those kinds of things are written in prose. Poetry you've probably spent some time analyzing, but maybe not as much. I like this definition I got from poetry.org. They say poetry is an art form in which human language is used for its aesthetic qualities, in addition to or instead of its notional and semantic content. So what the heck does that mean? Aesthetic qualities are how the poem works as an experience. Notional semantic content, this is what the poem says, what it's about. And so poetry is more an experience than it is an explanation of something. Here are some other things that I think are important to know about the difference between these two genres. First of all, it is, poetry originated as an oral tradition, unlike prose, long before writing systems existed. It was important for passing down stories in oral societies. The epic poems, the Iliad, the Odyssey, would have been recited aloud. And even now, there is an importance of sound in poetry. And poetry uses devices that emphasize the musicality of spoken language. And it's key to listen to poetry out loud first before you do anything else with it. And so we'll always start our analysis of poetry by reading it out loud as well. Poetry does still have rules, though. They're just different. First of all, poetry has paragraphs. They're just not called paragraphs. They're called stanzas. Poetry also has sentences, and these sentences are broken into lines. And so we count the number of lines so that we can be specific when we're referencing certain parts of a poem by using line numbers. The first letter of the first word in each line is capitalized, whether it's the beginning of a sentence or not. Margins are the opposite of prose. You do not indent the beginning of a stanza. Poetry uses hanging margins, which is like the same as a works cited page, you know, the kind that Google Docs hates. And poems don't have to rhyme, though many do, and that goes back to the importance of sound. Take a look at this poem by Langston Hughes. Dreams. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. This poem has 2 stanzas. It has 4 lines in each stanza for a total of 8 lines. The first letter of each line is capitalized. And what are the other rules that we're talking about? We do have some rhyme in this poem. And so we would call it an A, B, C, B rhyme, because because die and fly rhyme, go and snow rhyme. If it were written like in prose, it would look like this, right? 2 short paragraphs of just 1 sentence each, indented. So you can see that it still makes syntactical sense. It's just broken up a little bit differently. The poet gets to decide how they want their line breaks to, or where they want to break the lines. Now, poets love breaking all rules, and so you'll notice this a lot in modern poetry, that some poems, like William Carlos Williams' famous The Red Wheelbarrow, break the rules that I've just given you. There is no capitalization in this poem, and there's no punctuation in the poem. And in fact, the stanzas are so short, they're only 4 words each. It reads like this: The red wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. An unusual poem, to be sure. If we were to write this in prose, it would look something like this. Really just 1 paragraph, or I didn't even indent it because it's so short. It's really just 1 sentence. So while poets break rules a lot, there are still rules, and it's important that we know them because oftentimes it helps us to better understand the literal meaning of a poem. So the key difference between poetry and prose, oh no, we already talked about this. Sorry, I had that in there twice. Why is poetry sometimes harder to understand is the next question. And the first thing is the condensed or compressed language. I think this is getting back to Rita Dove's quote about poetry being distilled. It's a poet uses fewer words to express complex feelings and ideas. And that in and of itself is tricky to understand as a reader. There are simply fewer words in a poem. A poet relies on precision. Each word carries a lot of weight in a poem and contributes significantly to the overall meaning. Also, layered meanings are used by poets, relying on figurative language to convey deeper meanings in a compact way. In a book, an author will use figurative language, of course, but also expository writing, where in poetry there's very little expository writing, that straightforward and logical writing like a news article, and instead it's mostly figurative, and we have to figure out the point as the reader. Poets also rely on ambiguity. Poems have multiple meanings and interpretations, and often when you finish a poem there's a feeling of open-endedness. Sometimes you feel like, wait, what the heck did that mean? And I would encourage you to, instead of being frustrated by that, trying to look back at the poem with your questions and to read it and ask those questions as you reread it, asking them again, and knowing that there's more than one interpretation. As long as we can get back to the analysis that is based on the facts, the literal pieces of the poem, we can interpret poems in different ways. There's also an emphasis, even more so, on form and structure in poetry. Oftentimes, form and structure mirror content in a poem, and that just means that the way the poem is built helps show its meaning. So if a poem is about war, it might be structured in a chaotic way to emphasize the chaos of war. Or if a poem is about control, it might be structured in a very tight, controlled, regular way to mirror what the poem is about. So those are some different ways that make it sometimes harder to understand. At the end of our unit, we are going to write a guided literary analysis. And this is a close, detailed examination of a piece of literature, which involves close reading, literary appreciation, reading between the lines, an understanding of the effects of literary features, and also timed writing on a poem. And so that is what our end of the unit summative assessment will be. And we will do that in class with paper and pen. For IB, you will also take an exam in May called the Paper 1 Guided Literary Analysis, and it's for 35% of your overall score. For that test, you're going to write on 2 unseen passages. Each one will have a guiding question for you. And usually one of the passages will be a poem and one will be something else, maybe an excerpt from a novel or a memoir, a travel log, or a play. So it'll be 2 pieces from 2 different genres of these 4 with a guiding question for each. All right, we've got a strategy now to help us get started with understanding poetry. It's a great strategy when you encounter a brand new poem or short text without using historical context, because that's what we'll be doing for this unit. We're ignoring historical context, stuff about the writer's life, and we're just really focusing on the language of the poem. It's called SCASI. It's an acronym. And using it is going to help you break down a poem so that you can think about it in an organized way. The first S stands for setting. You're going to want to ask these questions of the poem. Is there a place? Some poems don't have a place. The first poem we're going to read, Planting a Sequoia, has a clear and explicit place. So figure out what it is as you're reading it. And then how is it described, and how as a reader does it make you feel? The C in SCASI stands for characters. Who's involved? Who is the speaker? That's what the term we use for poetry. We no longer say narrator. That's just for prose. So when you're talking about whoever it is who's talking to us, they are the speaker. What do we know about them? In Planting a Sequoia, the first poem we're going to read, there are a lot of facts about the poem, about the speaker that you can find from reading it. So watch for those. And then another good question to ask is, what are the speaker's attitudes? And then what about other people? Who else is involved and what do we know about them? So those are good questions to ask for the C in SCASI. The A stands for action. What action takes place, or what is the situation? What, if anything, is going on? Sometimes, again, it's not clear always in a poem what the action is. It's maybe more just a situation that we find ourselves in. But Planting a Sequoia has some clear action, so watch for that as well. There's also some hypothetical action in the poem where the speaker talks about what he would have been doing had something else happened. So, and poets love hypothetical situations and scenarios too, so watch for those in the poems we're reading. The second S stands for style, and this is so important, but we're going to skip it for now, and we're just going to focus on the other elements, okay? So we'll come back to this. I is for ideas. What's the idea? Either stated or underlying or topic. So sometimes it's not clear, you know, the poet doesn't tell us, my poem is about this, right? And we really have to do a lot of work to try to figure out what the idea is. But sometimes it is given to us in a clearer way, or hinted at more clearly than in others. And if you can kind of locate the lines in the poem where the idea of the poem is clearer, that will help you determine this. Another good question to ask is, what ideas surface in the text, and what are the larger implications? Okay, so the next video is going to be taking you through Planting a Sequoia and how to answer these SCASI questions on that particular poem. And then I'm going to have you do it on a poem yourself. Thanks for hanging out.